Gojo Satoru is possibly the most morally complex character in Jujutsu Kaisen, and I think that this complexity first emerges in a revealing scene in episode 6 of the anime, where Gojo explains to Ichiji the reason why he chose to become a teacher at Tokyo Jujutsu High. Gojo, it turns out, doesn't teach because he loves teaching. He actually became a teacher as part of an elaborate political conspiracy. See, Gojo's great ambition is to overthrow the current order of Jujutsu society because the leading clans are simply corrupt beyond any hope of redemption as far as he's concerned. And even though it's true that Gojo is strong enough to simply kill off the leading authorities of these clans, he also recognizes that that wouldn't actually accomplish very much, because a new regime of sorcerers is likely to replace it that's just as bad or even worse than the one that came before. But what Gojo really wants is to create a new and better world for Jujutsu society considered as a whole. And if Gojo is going to succeed in actually creating a better world, he's going to have to play the long game instead. He needs to spend some time collecting powerful sorcerers so that he can secure their loyalty to his cause. And then once he has a sufficient number of allies, he can use them to form the foundation of the next political order that he plans to impose. But Gojo also seems to think that the only feasible way to collect the allies that he needs is to forge his alliance with them when they're still young, when they're children. Because children haven't yet been corrupted by the clans, and they're impressionable. And that means that Gojo can more easily mold them to share his values and to be loyal to him. Or at any rate, it's a lot easier to win the loyalty of a child than it is to win the loyalty of a full-grown adult. And that's the reason why Gojo became a teacher. Because being a teacher gives Gojo easy and constant access to powerful and impressionable young sorcerers. And if you think about it, this story can actually explain the reason why there's one kind of student in particular that Gojo tends to recruit. Gojo isn't simply drawn to powerful young sorcerers, he's also drawn to sorcerers who are orphans or outcasts for one reason or another. So for example, Yuji and Yuta are both outcasts, insofar as the clans want them dead because they're threatened by their power. And it's worth pointing out that Megumi is also an outcast in his own way. Megumi, after all, is the orphaned son of Toji, and he never really had any home or family to call his own. And the ruthlessness of the Jujutsu clans are entirely to blame for the conditions into which he was born. And so Megumi, no less than Yuji and Yuta, has a very good reason to oppose the Jujutsu clans in general, and to feel no special loyalty to them and even to despise them. And of course, Gojo knows this better than anyone. And it's a major part of the reason of why Gojo recruited Megumi, Yuji, and Yuta to be students at Tokyo Jujutsu High. He wasn't merely interested in them because they're powerful. He also saw that they're young and vulnerable, and could therefore be molded into his allies for the purposes of his revolutionary project. And when you think about Gojo's relationship to his students in terms of these political goals, it can easily make him start to sound like he's a little bit of a hypocrite, and maybe even something of a bad dude. Because Gojo is always moralizing about the importance of childhood, and how the Jujutsu clans don't have the right to destroy the childhood of Yuji and Yuta, or for that matter, Riko. And Gojo's sensitivity about this topic stems from a certain amount of resentment that he feels about losing his own childhood, in which he bore some truly impossible responsibilities as a sorcerer of such immense power. But you could very easily argue that Gojo is now using child sorcerers in precisely the way that he thinks is so wrong. He's molding them into his own personal soldiers in what is essentially a quest to rule the world. So Gojo's hands are not entirely clean, and there's this real question of what makes him any better than the sorcerers that he's trying to overthrow. And I'm actually not even posing this question to suggest to you that Gojo is some kind of villain. I actually just think it's important to consider the possibility that Gojo might be a hypocrite if you want to understand Gojo's relationship to himself. Because Gojo is completely aware of his own hypocrisy, and he even feels a certain amount of guilt. That's the reason why he calls himself a bad person and a bad teacher at the beginning of the very speech where he describes his revolutionary project and how his role as a teacher fits into it. Gojo knows that his hands are dirty, but he also feels responsible for changing the world. And he doesn't know how to do that except by allowing himself to become a little bit like the very sorcerers that he's trying to overthrow.